Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. Hi everyone, welcome to the Southern Tier Central's LWRP for Historic Structures final presentation. My name is Brian. I'm Senior Planner here at Southern Tier Central. Today we are going to talk about the project background. We're going to go over some flood proofing methods. We're going to take a look at renderings of hypothetical flood proofing measures as they are applied to example structures that were done for us by the folks at Channis and Anderson. And then we are going to go through some of the kind of what are the funding opportunities out there, and who to contact for some further information and resources. So without further ado, I will jump right in. Let me make sure that this is working. Perfect. So the project background, in 2017, Southern Tier Central partnered with the town of Big Flats to complete a local waterfront revitalization program titled Strategy for Flood Resistant Southern Tier. One of the recommendations from this program was to provide technical support to help residents, businesses, and community organizations improve flood resilience. So as this project is an extension of that 2017 project, where Southern Tier Central partnered with Schuyler County to provide educational resources and tools for residents, business owners, and communities to improve flood resilience and hopefully inspire those living in the Southern Tier flood-prone areas to be proactive and take action. And one thing that we decided was to focus on historic structures as they are particularly vulnerable and deserve special attention. So this project really is a continuation of that 2017 project in a different format with a focus on historic structures. So the project timeline, this project started in 2019. Southern Tier Central partnered with Schuyler County to apply for that LWRP grant. In late 2019, early 2020, the grant was awarded, but in March 2020, COVID-19 happened. And so after COVID-19, the original plan for the project was to do a lot of public outreach and engagement, and the project team really had to pivot to figure out what that was going to look like now that COVID occurred. There was a delay in the project, and then in fall 2021 to spring 2022, Cornell Design Connect, which is a group of students out of Cornell University, conducted public engagement and completed the first draft of this final report that is going to be posted on our website shortly. And what they did is they did public engagement using online resources and other things. They held meetings over Zoom with stakeholders in each of the 3 counties and got some community engagement and feedback that way. So after that, we're at spring 2022. There's another kind of like short delay, and then in fall 2022 to spring 2023, what we did is we contracted with Channis and Anderson architects to provide renderings of the example sites in 3-county region. So one thing that Cornell Design Connect, they did an awesome job on public engagement. And then when we looked at that final report, what we wanted to do was add some renderings of what would a flood mitigation measure on an example site look like in our region. And so we contracted with Channis and Anderson architects, and they put together some renderings that we're going to go through later. And then finally, fall 2023 to present, we worked on completing booklets, pamphlets, an ArcGIS story map, and a final report. So these booklets and pamphlets were distributed at our regional leadership conference on April 4th. Our ArcGIS story map is now up on our GIS hub, and the final report plus the PDF versions of the booklets and pamphlets will be posted on our website. So flooding in the Southern Tier. So as a lot of you know, there is localized flooding that occurs almost every year in this region. I just also wanted to highlight 3 major events as these might come up. Actually, 2 of them will definitely come up through the renderings. And then the third one is most recent, Tropical Storm Fred in 2021. So Finger Lakes flood of 1935 and Hurricane Agnes in 1972 really affected the whole region. Tropical Storm Fred was had some bigger impacts out in western Steuben County. But these are major flooding events that have happened and could happen again. And like I said previously, we do see localized flooding occurring pretty much every year in this region. So before we dive into these examples, what I'm going to do is do an overview of floodproofing methods. What we decided to do for our renderings is focus on 4 floodproofing methods, which are dry floodproofing, elevation, flood walls and levees, and abandoning the first floor. Wet floodproofing is another one of these major methods that's fairly common, but because the exterior of the building doesn't have so much change, we decided to not provide a rendering example for that one. For those of you who did attend any of the Design Connect public outreach sessions, they went through a lot of information on this, so some of this might be familiar, but we're gonna do a rerun and there might be a couple of things that are new. Design Connect took that and made some tables with advantages, disadvantages, things like that, which are great. So wet floodproofing. Wet floodproofing a building involves altering the property and its contents so that floodwater is allowed to enter the building in a controlled manner. Advantages, it's relatively affordable. It has a moderate impact on the historic character, and it can be implemented partially and incrementally as resources permit. Disadvantages, it's ineffective against heavy flooding. It requires interior modification, requires cleaning after the flood event, and requires ongoing maintenance. So it is basically you are allowing that water to come into the building, but you're controlling the water. You are going to have to maintain, you're going to have to clean after the flood event because the water is entering the building, but it's relatively affordable and has moderate impact on the historic character. Here's a diagram from the National Park Service how to floodproof historic buildings document. One thing I forgot to mention in the timeline is that actually through this, while we had this grant and we were going, the National Park Service put out a floodproofing historic buildings guideline document for the nation. So we're using some of their resources in this as well, but that also kind of led to some of the pivot of like, okay, let's really focus in on the Southern Tier Central region and get some renderings of specific buildings within the Southern Tier Central region. And so this is an example of wet floodproofing. Flood vents to allow water to come in and out. There, you can retain historic materials and features that are flood damage resistant. You've got a sump pump, and you probably will, if your utilities are in the basement, you're gonna have to relocate those utilities. Dry floodproofing is another adaptation method that we're highlighting. It's designed to keep the building watertight by establishing a seal on the exterior of the foundation and sealing all interior spaces below the flood risk level. So the advantages are that it is relatively affordable. It has a moderate impact on historical character. Disadvantages, it may be ineffective against flash flooding. It's ineffective against heavy flooding, requires significant exterior modification, requires accessibility, and requires ongoing maintenance. So you have some advantages and disadvantages there. It is another relatively affordable method and has a moderate impact on the historical character. So here is a diagram of dry floodproofing. You're going to waterproof the walls to the established flood risk level. You can put in things like temporary floodgates, as you can see across the doors there. There's a backflow valve in here that prevents a sewer backup, and you can see those vents are below the flood risk level, and those are all sealed so that you're creating this watertight seal around the building. Elevation. So elevation is done by either separating the structure from its current foundation, building a new higher foundation below the structure, or extending the original foundation upward, and then placing the structure on the new foundation in the same location. By elevating the structure, the building should be protected against any flood below the elevation height, and all contents inside the structure can remain dry. This is something that you're definitely going to see anytime you're in a special flood hazard area in that 100-year floodplain. Usually structures within the 100-year floodplain need to be elevated to above the base flood elevation. I believe it's usually 2 feet above the base flood elevation, but please double check that, or check in with Janet Thigpen, our floodplain mitigation specialist, who will be able to tell you exactly the requirements. She's also put together some great resources on our website. You'll get her contact info and a link to the website. I believe it's later in the slideshow. But elevation is a very important tool to method to flood-proof buildings. So its advantages: it significantly reduces the flood risk. It might reduce flood insurance premiums if you are in one of those special flood hazard areas. It's effective against flash flooding and heavy flooding. So really anything above that elevation level, you're protected from. Disadvantages: it is very expensive. It also requires significant exterior and interior modification, and it might significantly impact the historic character of the building. So you're going to see elevation in the Corning Benjamin Patterson Inn, where we actually had Janice Anderson put a rendering together, elevating the building 7 feet in the air, I believe it is, which is above the high water mark from Hurricane Agnes in 1972. So you're going to see what that impact looks like on the historic character of the building. Here's an example of a small house being elevated. So you can see that's where it is. It's being raised and placed onto a new foundation. And it's got, and then it gets set down onto that new foundation to elevate the building. And you can use some landscaping features to mask that height change as well. So the last, or no, second to last one that we are going to highlight here is construction of levees and flood walls, which means putting a barrier between the structure and the source of the flooding. So advantages: it is reliable. It protects the structure fully to the design height. So however high your barrier is how high it's going to protect the structure to. Its disadvantages: it is relatively expensive. It requires significant exterior modification and ongoing maintenance. It may significantly damage the historic character of the building depending on the height. For example, like the visual historical character, the visual aesthetics, things like that. And it might not be suitable for property owners with small plots of land because you are doing an entire site improvement, not just the building. That flood wall or levee is going to have to be done at least outside of the building, but it might be done actually on the perimeter of the entire site. So here's a couple examples of flood walls and levees. So that house has a low scale flood wall, and then it's actually got a floodgate that will seal across the driveway. This berm in Kansas is a levee there that's protecting that like barn or a residential structure. And then you've got a permanent flood wall incorporated into the edge of a loading dock, which is flood protection and a guardrail in Iowa. And so here's the last floodproofing method that we're going to highlight, which is abandoning the first floor. So this is modifying a multi-story building to relocate all usable spaces 2 floors above the established flood risk level. Any abandoned story below the established flood risk level must be altered and adapted into a utilitarian wet or dry floodproof space. So advantages of this is that you're getting full protection to the height of the first story. So that entire first story, it's abandoned, but you're getting protection because you're not using it. You don't have to do anything during a flood. It's low maintenance. And there is the potential for the creation of storage or parking spaces. Those are kinds of things that you could do if you abandon the first floor. The first floor. Disadvantages: you are losing usable square footage of the building. It requires a stairs, elevator, or accessibility as per ADA requirements as well. And here is a couple of photos of the examples of abandoning the first floor. So former retail tenant spaces are parking there, and they try to maintain that character along the sidewalk and put the parking spaces on that first floor. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, we have some examples from the region with renderings that Shannon Anderson put together for us. And so we have 4 examples I'm going to run through. Burke Tavern Museum in Montreux Falls is an example of dry floodproofing. The Ben Patterson Inn in Corning is an example of elevation. The First Presbyterian Church of Big Flats in Big Flats is an example of floodwall and levee. And Historic Main Street, Addison, is an example of abandoning the first floor, and that is in Addison. So the Brick Tavern Museum, this is a historic building in Montreux Falls in Schuyler County. It is operated by the Schuyler County Historical Society now. So you can see a picture of the building on the left, and then a rendering of the building with no flood proofing quite yet on the right. So that's just the building. When you put in dry floodproofing measures, so these are concrete pads and masonry anchors that are supporting this custom flood plank system outside. And you can see it's covering up the seals on underneath the windows, the bottom windows, and in front of the door over there. So just going back to the previous image where there's nothing, you can see on the bottom, there are openings, and then here those openings are sealed, and they're also going around on the other side of the building. You can't see from this view, there is utilities on the outside, and those plank systems are going around there. Here's a front view with the dry floodproofing measures and a flood at the design flood elevation. So you can see there that that flood is coming all the way up there. It gets that design flood elevation is right about the bottom of those windows, and when a flood comes in, you could get waving that is going to go get into the windows in there. So the dry floodproofing does prevent that. Rear view without floodproofing measures here. And then dry floodproofing measures and a flood at the design flood elevation. Again, that waving is going to get above the porch and actually in through that back door. So there is, I believe, also a plank system that goes across the back door to prevent water from getting in. So here's just a little table about the Brick Tavern Museum. Actions to dry floodproof. You can infill the basement level completely, relocating all storage utilities and mechanical equipment to the upper level. These are things that you'll probably see throughout all of our examples. Repointing all brick and stone joints, and so this is making sure that everything, that mortar within the brick and stone is all sealed. Install concrete pads and masonry anchors supporting this custom flood plank system at the windows, doors, and the ground mounted utilities around the building perimeter. Initial cost, it would be somewhat expensive. You'll see a couple other ones have a higher initial cost, and it's got standard components where possible, but some of these, like the connections to the historic facade, would have to be custom designed, and they need to have concealed masonry anchors. So some other considerations: significant advanced alert to an imminent flood event would be required for this deployment. It maintains the character of the structure and provides maximum protection of the interior during even a severe flood event, as long as you have that advanced warning. It does not entirely prevent water infiltration into the first floor, but it does slow the infiltration, and it would require additional storage for the system components when it is disassembled. So before we move on, one thing that I'm going to show you is that Shannon Anderson put together these great videos of all the angles of the building and what it would look like when a flood event occurs. So I'm going to pull that up for the Brick Tavern Museum, and we will watch each video as it goes. So here you are seeing, let's go full screen. All right, so here you're seeing the surrounding of the building. And this is the rear portion of the building. So rain is coming, you've got a flood event occurring. Flood waters, you see it's all getting into the basement there, getting all the way up to the bottom of those windows. You can see a little waving action that's going to get into there. Yep, and that's the door at the back. Okay, here's the proposed flood mitigation. You can see those planks as barriers. That same flood events occurring. But now, your external areas are sealed. And so that is, let me see how to get out of my full screen here. That is the first tab. So the next one that we've got is the Benjamin Patterson Inn, and this is an example of elevation. This is in Corning, and it is quite an old. This inn was used as an inn and as a residence. So it could also be an example for someone that has like an older residence. It is one of the oldest buildings, I believe, in Steuben County. If I built circa 1796. So here's what it would look like raised 7 feet in the air, which is above the flood height that occurred at during Hurricane Agnes in 1972. So you can see that there are stone foundation there with some, let's see what I've got here. So piers or walls 7 feet. You've got an occupiable outdoor area there, raised to landscape to promote ground infiltration, which should help with some of the water. Passively activated flood vents at large supporting walls. And one thing too here is to document the original grade level with a subtle datum line that can, on the original foundation, to kind of help maintain that historic character there. Another thing is it's fieldstone continuous with the facade, and they've got some shallow recessed arches taken from colonial era architectural language there. So here's the rear ground view level. You can see that the accessibility now, so the ramp enters in the rear, it goes around the other side of the building. There. Side level view, you see the ramp on the corner again, and you can see the building raised all the way up. And so the ADA ramp is on a non-primary facade. This is what it would look like with a flood at the high water mark. It's kind of the aerial view there. You can see the whole structure is protected. Same thing here on the back. And so actions to elevate. So again, like we said before with the other two, with the other example, infill basement level completely, relocate all storage utilities and mechanical equipment to the upper level, raise the building elevation on piers or walls 7 feet over this occupiable outdoor area landscape to promote ground infiltration. The passively activated flood vents are there at large supporting walls. Configure the new and existing architectural elements to maintain and enhance the historic character of the building. Document original grade level with a subtle datum line there. Initial cost, definitely more expensive than the dry floodproofing. And raising the structure significantly creates more challenges and more advanced infrastructure for supporting that building. Front stair, porches, and access points have to be added. Miscellaneous areas of the existing structure would require reconfiguration as well. Other considerations, it does create 7 feet of vertical that must be designed to complement the historic character of the building. It changes the relationship of the building to its site context, and the State Historic Preservation Office could take issue with the treatment of new elements. But this is basically protecting the building to worst case scenario, which is Hurricane Agnes, which is the high water mark, I believe, for flooding there. So I'm going to show a video now of the same thing as before. So you're going to see the exterior just of the rendering, then with the how it looks elevated, and then in the case of a flood event. So here's the rear of the building. Flood coming in. Oh, I forgot to mention this one. This isn't a flood that happened this high. This is without any protection. And now we're elevating the entire structure there. You can see that kind of silly datum line. And areas for water to pass through in the back too. Flood event is occurring. But that water is only coming up so high so that you are able to protect that. There, that is that. All right, so moving on to the First Presbyterian Church of the Flats. So this is an example of a flood wall or levee. I believe there's actually on this rendering a flood wall and a levee. So the flood wall goes around the front, levee goes around the back, and the earthen berm. So you'll see that in the renderings. This structure went the high water mark also, I believe, during Hurricane Agnes was 6 feet. And the proposed flood mitigation is to configure this flood wall around the entire building. And then you've got an earthen berm in the back. You'll see a rear view shortly. And you can see you've got entrances for cars to come in and that glass there. So you've got the glass flood wall. You can see there's unobstructed views of the church, which is great. So it maintains that historic element. The stone veneer cladding on the wall reflects the materiality of the original structure's foundation. And then you've got openings for vehicular and pedestrian access. And these are automatic flood barriers that are below grade that would come up in the case of a flood. So that is the front aerial view. This is what it would look like in the case of a flood. You can see you can kind of see the barriers are up in this picture, and you'll get to see it directly in the video that I will show. This is a street level view with the flood at the high water mark. Here's the rear view of the flood wall and the earthen berms. You can see the earthen berm is going around the back part of the structure. And the flood wall around the front part, the sidewalk and the parking lot is. Same thing here, flood wall and earthen berms, a flood at the high water mark. So here's what you would have to do in order to create this. So actions are configure a continuous flood wall around the perimeter to a height of 6 feet. Non-street facing portions of the wall may be prepared as earthen berms for the flood wall. Street facing reinforced concrete with stone veneer cladding, like I mentioned, reflecting the original structure's foundation and the foundations of other area structures. The top half is a proprietary glass flood wall system, allowing these unobstructed views. And openings in the flood wall for pedestrian and vehicular access have automatic flood barriers recessed entirely below grade. This is pretty expensive. And it requires engineering, a significant amount of site work, and materials, as well as proprietary specialty products. It does create a long-term flood protection system that requires minimal upkeep. It preserves the historic character of the building. It is a potential alternative to the automatic passive barriers. You could have a active barrier system, which basically means that people are putting them up. And that would require storage and deployment, which could reduce costs, but then again, you need that advanced warning. You're gonna need a team to get in and put them up, things like that. Deployable stairs can also be used for access in and out, up and over of the site during a less severe flood event, if necessary. So let me pull up that video. So here is the Big Flats Presbyterian Church. See there, and this is what would occur in a flood event with no protection. And so you got the flood mitigation, flood wall, and berm, these active flood gates. And I believe then it's going to show the flood gates. Yep, so this is the activated system. So you have it recessed below, and then it would come up to add that protection. So that the entire structure is secure. And then you have your flood occurring. And flood protection to that 6-foot level. Alrighty. So we are going to move on to our last example here, which is historic Main Street Addison, which is abandoning the first floor. So what we focused on here, and you can see, is this kind of corner of Addison, which is the abandoning the entire first floor here. And what you'll see is getting an elevated walkway actually up to use the second floor. So here is the rendering of that. So what you've got is, so Addison does have a levee, but it does not actually protect to the 100-year floodplain level. And so it basically what would happen is the potential flood elevation, it makes the most sense. The potential high flood water mark, it makes the most sense to abandon the first floor here. We did play around with raising the structure like 18 to 30 inches, which is a good option because it would prevent a lot of floods, but for total protection, abandoning the first floor was the best option. And here you have the front side view of the site with steps to this elevated walkway that's going to go in the back. And you can see an elevator there off to the side. It's got a false storefront in the front to maintain that historic character and Main Street appearance. And the elevator would also be able to work in a flood event. So here is what the back looks like there. So you've got your walkway up there. You looks like you've got a little community space at the bottom if you wanted for like a pop-up book fair or something like that. Yeah, you're abandoning the first floor, but you are also able to use now that second floor. Here's a side view. You can see that elevator again and the steps to get up. And you've also got some like some good guideposts to like for wayfinding to get people up and to the back there. Ooh, did I skip one? I believe that's just one more view of the rear. Again, you can see that second floor being used, the walkway, and the first floor for parking, pop-up events, things like that. Here is the rear view of the elevated walkway with the flood at the design flood elevation, which, like I mentioned, that design flood elevation is pretty much. So if you're going to abandon the first floor, actions would be to empty basements, relocate all storage utilities and mechanical equipment to upper level and infield basements, which we've seen before. Remove occupiable space and non-flood resistant materials at the first or street level. Configure new existing architectural elements to maintain and enhance the historic character of the building facade while providing a false storefront to maintain that historic appearance. And then you can have open assembly like that pop-up or parking areas, things like that. Behind. Relocate existing first level businesses to upper levels and provide elevated outdoor promenade for access to upper levels. And then provide new exterior stairs and elevator. So the initial cost is quite expensive, as you can imagine. You're gonna have to create an elevator walkway and accompanying steps and elevator. Areas throughout the existing structures, like basement and first level, will have to be reconfigured. The upper level also have to be reconfigured to house these relocated businesses, utilities, and access from the building's rear. Other considerations, consideration for relocating businesses and maintaining a strong business community, as well as continuing the option for these live work residential units potentially, should be as strong goals as protecting the building from flood damage and sustaining a healthy, vibrant downtown. Provides design aesthetic and attributes for walkable and easy wayfinding paths to the upper floor businesses and residential, and it presents new life for the rear of the buildings, the view of the river, and options for outdoor community and event spaces. So here is the video of what that would look like. So you can see this is a flood with no flood mitigation. And now with the flood mitigation measures, you can see the elevator, some spaces for people using that upper floor. People can sit maybe at a restaurant and overlook the river. And then should a flood occur here, is overtopping that levee. And it's getting, but you're protected there because you're abandoning. So here it is. Oops. Yes. Okay. So the final document here. So this is something that yeah, let me just collect myself for a second. The final document, it includes all of these things. So we went through all of the flood mitigation methods. We went through the renderings, and then we have a final document that includes general steps to flood-proof your property, general flood mitigation actions for communities, potential funding opportunities, all the information on these slides in order. So you can go through that. Potential funding opportunities, I know we mentioned we talk about briefly, so I'll just touch on that. And there are some different ones here. We've got the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program, where state and local authorities apply on behalf of individuals. Energy tax credits could be used for relocating and upgrading utilities. There are some Small Business Administration disaster loans and Federal Housing Administration 203K rehabilitation program as well. The biggest thing, though, about this, which is highlighted in this final document as well, is that local funding is going to be required. And the most valuable and most at-risk structures, in terms of historic structures, we're going to have to prioritize and think about what we want in terms of which ones we really want to look at and adding these flood-proofing methods to. So there's not a way really out of this or to just flood-proof everything without some local funding required and work on the local end. So with that, further information and resources. If you have any further questions about this project or flood mitigation resources, please feel free to contact us. There's my contact information. It's also on the website. Janet Thigpen is our flood mitigation specialist. Like I mentioned, all of our brochures were at the conference, and our ArcGIS story map is online. The brochures will be booklets, and final report will be in our documents tab as well shortly. And so with that, thank you very much for your time, and that is all that I have for you.